Good evening, Miguel. How are you? Kira. Good evening, all. I trust this is everyone. Welcome to our fundamentals of records and information management. It's about 2 more minutes and we'll get started just to give persons, if there's anyone else joining us. And this evening, we will basically be going on and doing an overview of what we'll be covering for the duration. So, okay. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our introductory fundamentals, records and information management session. And it's a pleasure to have you all here. And we're going to begin by just basically providing a virtual introduction, starting with myself. My name is Renee Tucker, and I'm a certified information professional. I've been involved in records management for more than 20 plus years, and there's never a dull moment. That's all I can say. Some people may have another perception of it, and we're just here to basically get started with understanding it, knowing that at this time, it's pretty much moved to the forefront as opposed to being a profession that was primarily carried out, should we say, in the behind the scenes, behind the stage setting. However, if you're keeping abreast of what's happening in the news, etc., from time to time you see that corporation, that entity being hauled before the courts because of infractions related to maybe something with fraud, but ultimately when it boils down, there was inadequate frameworks, etc., in place to ensure that proper accounting or proper records management of the organization's information wasn't taking place. So thank you again, and we're going to get started with our intros. I don't want to have to pick, so let's all just unmute one at a time, and we'll get started with intros and pretty much ask for just a few things. What's your career field? Because although it's records management, it's not limited to one profession. It's required across many sectors and industries. So at this time, can we begin our introductions of persons who have decided to participate in this course? Anyone wants to go first? Good evening. Is this M. Young? We're having a bit of a difficulty hearing you. It sounds like you're breaking up. Hello? Hello? I'm having a difficulty. Hello? Yeah. Hello? Go ahead. My name is Michael Young. I'm an administrative clerk at Canada Bank. My reason for participating in the course would be I'm the accountant at Canada Bank. Are you on another device? No? Or are you on like a cell phone? A computer. You're on the computer? Yes, ma'am. Oh, okay. It's just a lot of background noises. I mean, like a staticky connection. Or do you want to put it in the chat then? Okay. Okay, that'll help because I vaguely made out where you said you work. So Jada, are you prepared to introduce yourself for us?
I can. So we have to answer all of the questions.
That's up to you. It's not being graded, so you can share what you wish.
Okay, well, my name is Jada Silvera. I am a teller at the Bahamas Law Enforcement Cooperative Credit Union. My reason for participating in this course is I wanted to take a course, although it's not directly related to my career. Mm-hmm. It could still benefit me.
Are you sure it's not related?
I mean, I think it could be related, but well, I will learn.
Well, anyway, we'll see how you feel at the end.
Okay, and I'm not new to records and information management because as a teller, I would have to deal with certain records, especially if persons authorizing others to transact on their account. And like you say, my expectations are, I hope that I'll learn more about record management and how it relates to my career field.
Okay, that's good.
And a fun fact, I am a senior student at UB getting my accounting degree. So hopefully that could be helpful to my degree as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're gonna hear from Ms. McDonald.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I am so excited to be here. So excited that I actually joined you guys today. I'm actually on vacation.
Oh.
I'm all the way in Andros. So
that's one of my hometown, Fresh Creek,
right.
Calabash Bay.
Yes, I'm north. I'm Nicholstown.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that shows you that I'm really excited that I took time from my vacation. Guys. Okay. So my name is Mel. You could call me Mel McDonald.
Okay.
Delta Bank. I'm a senior data management officer.
Okay.
4 years.
Okay.
Record keeping has a lot to do with my fields. And I want to be able to effectively manage and use information and understand the data design and concepts.
Okay.
That would enable me to get involved in more projects.
Thank you. Thank you. So we heard from Michael. We heard from Jada. Demerit. Did we hear from Demerit yet? Now okay, go ahead. Good evening. Perhaps, are you having difficulty with the mic? I can see your mic is open, but I'm not hearing you. Okay. So basically, work this evening. You notice the hours. We usually started at 6, but now it's 6:30, and we usually go for about 3 hours. So tonight, what we're gonna do? Did you get an email with some chapter attachments, like the copy of the recommended text? Anyone?
No, I didn't. I just got the PowerPoint presentation
Oh, okay.
you're looking
All
at.
right.
Yes.
So I will make sure there's a recommended text that, given the time frame, you may not get to. I don't think that it's in stock now, but what I'll provide primarily for the duration of this time would be reflections and notes with regard to that that particular text. In addition to that, would be online links and articles pertinent to the topic. And I will also provide the general outline. The class itself, I'm hoping we're pretty much interactive, and as we learn about concepts, etc., we come back, we're able to share it as it relates to our work environment. So we'll also have a few quizzes. Usually homework would be assigned after each session to be turned in the day before the session via my email. So I'll make sure you get all those handouts with the outlines, etc. So primarily we have various modules we're going to cover, and these modules will assist us with regard to understanding the broad concepts involved with records management. So in module 1, these are some of the topics that we will basically be relating to in terms of looking at what is a record and the importance of records in government and society, and records management as a discipline, and how it's basically a role that's evolving. Primarily, records management as a discipline would have evolved out of the need to manage physical paper records. However, with the advance of technology, we have seen lots of shifts and growth with regard to how things are being done in relation to records management. So primarily there's less management around physical paper, documents, media, and now we have more emphasis on managing the electronic records. And we know that as a result of COVID, there's been a surge in terms of organizations having to quickly adopt the digital platform in order to execute their duties, conduct their business needs, etc. So I'll stop sharing and I'll look for my list of principles that relate to records management, which is an important. If you don't get anything else out of this class, please understand the principles of what applies. So just a minute, let me get that for you. Okay, so you would have, no one got the attachments with those documents as yet, from what I understand.
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right, so let me check my email for what I sent, and then I'll be able to pull that up for you. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So in terms of what is a record, this is like a infographic that pretty much outline what we are talking about when we relate to what is a record and what is not a record, because ultimately the records that the business needs require are important. They help with the decision making in the company. They help us to work more efficiently. They help us to know what we have to protect and control. Okay, so knowing what is a record for our company is very important. And this is a kind of a clear visual. So if you're creating the record, you got it or received it to use for conducting your business, then that's something that would warrant the record status. Did the record originate from somewhere else, but you were the one who responded or took action on the material? Okay, does the information document something about your organization's functions, policies, decisions, procedures, operations, missions, etc.? Then definitely you would want to keep that as a record. Okay, we have records that are original documents, okay, and they don't exist anywhere else. So that's important for us to note, because that means it would warrant having to ensure it's managed properly. Okay, some of the things that are not considered records relate to draft documents. And while at sometimes a draft that may have a important note or it shows why a particular change was made, etc. Sometimes a few drafts may warrant record status, but by the most part, we generally don't consider them as records. Okay, if it's published material or process information, meaning that you went, you did your research, etc., and then you so primarily published materials are your brochures, your different catalogs, and etc., things of those nature in terms of providing information to the public. You won't necessarily have those as records. unless like you're the publisher and you're retaining certain the first version, etc., for historical purposes of something like that. But generally, this document outlines helping you to determine for your organization and understanding what's a record that would warrant protection and what's not a record. So these things like documents, books, or sound recordings, because a record does not necessarily have to be a paper document. It could be other types of materials that your business needs create that has information required for your day-to-day operations. So this would be one of those documents that I will make sure you get sent to you via email, the emails that you would have provided. Okay, and we also will be looking at principles. Okay, and these principles, they're telling us why we must have some sort of important management attached to records and information, because these principles focus on things like accountability, transparency, etc. Okay, so we will be looking also at, there are also certain requirements for keeping records. Some relate to regulations or legislations or legal reasons. Okay, we would want to keep records if we know our company is involved in some type of a lawsuit. We have to go to court. We will have to provide evidence and documentation to establish facts. So there's that particular aspect of record keeping and why it's important. Okay, can anyone think of a situation whereby there was need to rely on corporate information to establish facts? Anything in your circumstances whereby you would have had to go into your files, check your records, and basically present them in order to establish a case or to clarify an important matter? I see some of you, someone is in banking, someone is with the credit union.
Okay, I would think policies and procedures, contracts and agreements, or even budgets and minutes of meetings.
All of those definitely are your corporate record and would need to be managed. And that management relates from the time it's received or created until you ultimately no longer have a need for it. Okay, so we'll be looking at things like the life cycle of the record. So that concept is also an important part of records management. Okay, so in our first, the book is basically a reference book by a renowned records management professional associated with the Association of Records Managers and Administrators, Mr. Safferty. It's called Records and Information Management, Fundamentals of Professional Practice. And so we basically, in that first chapter, we will be looking at things like what is records management, okay, the conceptual concepts, the foundational concepts, okay, so basically it's a specialized discipline, okay, that is concerned with analysis and control of corporate information. And corporate information is an asset. It's an asset just like your cash or your building or your property. Okay, your business needs generates information. Your business need creates information. Okay, and information has varying levels. So some information you can share, some information you cannot share. So the whole aspect of control around that information is where records management comes in. So records management also has standards. There's the ISO 15489, which relates to, it's the general record keeping standard. It's not the only one, okay, but it talks about the role of records as evidence of information about business activities and transactions. So we will also be looking at how do you get to the fact or the understanding of managing that information. And so we will be looking at those processes involved, you know, because to get started, if you want to manage something, you have to have a program in place. And so that's where your records management program would come in. And that program has to be designed before it can actually be implemented. So in designing that program, you basically will have to look at the resources you have available, what your costing would look like. And basically that first component revolves around project management plans. Okay, then you eventually have to end up developing a policy. Okay, so that policy would guide records management for your organization in terms of the purpose, the roles and responsibilities, etc. You would also need to have in place what we call a records retention schedule. And so each of these components that I consider tools for the actual management of information, we will be looking at. This course is not designed for you to come out in that short space of time, learning how to do a retention turn and learning how to write policy. No, it's just to understand what role they play within this program and understanding the components for a good program. So we'll be looking at policy, we'll be looking at schedules, and basically to get a schedule, you have to know what records you have. So that involves a process, which means having to do an inventory, okay? And when you look at the volume of information today, we can't overlook technology. Technology is very essential, it's very important in helping us to execute our function and to make the whole process of records management cost effective and efficient. Okay. So also involved in that records management initiative would be things like change management. So you would have to look at education, you'd have to look at training and workshops for staff, and basically a strategy to communicate to the rest of your office and organization. Okay, that communication strategy can involve things like having an intranet and a website and a page where you can go and post information about the policy, post the retention schedule, so that the different units or departments know what records they're creating based on the work you would have already done, the assessment from the inventory, and how long to keep it. And then you develop your procedures around making sure you can manage that effectively. So I'm gonna share, let me just make sure I can find that one. but I do have a view of a life cycle when we talk about records. So let me share that. Okay, so pretty much this, when we're talking about a life cycle for records, and then you get the feeling, you get the understanding of having to manage these various stages in the life of the record. So creation does not necessarily have to mean from you. It can also mean what you receive as well. So that has to be managed because it's coming in to the organization in terms of maybe requesting service or for informational purposes or because it's required by regulations or law, etc. That then has to be distributed, meaning it has to go to whoever requires it. We have the actual use until that particular need or business function is carried out. Then we then store that information. Eventually it's disposed of, and that disposal could mean two things. That disposal could mean we're sending it for destruction, or it could mean that it's of so much value or importance, we want to keep it indefinitely, so it would go to an archives. So the whole records management concept is very detailed, and it's also linked with other things, because as we can see now, the digital transformation brings about the issues of protection and security. So you're working along with persons that may be in information security, you're working with audit, you're working with the legal team in order to provide a holistic and sound program for your institution. So before any particular questions or statements at this time? No one have any questions? Okay, so we'll move right along. Let me get the other detailed image that I want to share with you guys today as some of the things that we'll be covering during this time frame. Okay, so basically there are a lot of reasons, like I said, for records management, and one of those is compliance, okay? And that's compliance from the standpoint of legislation, etc. So basically the US is very, what shall I say, litigious. So there's a lot of things you can get in problems for if you're not following, if you're in a specific industry, especially financial services. There are a number of legislations out there and regulations. So in terms of compliance, primarily in the health and financial services industry, they're very heavily regulated in the US. And basically this is an indication of some of the legislations or regulations that govern various sectors in the US. For the Bahamas, number one, we usually look at the Public Records Act, which governs information in the public domain in terms of government agencies and ministries. So they're bound by that. But the archivists, in the interest of national significance or prominence, can acquire records from other areas other than government if that is deemed of historical significance. So with the Bahamas, unlike some of these places that actually have national policies and regulations around record keeping, we would have our regulations and stuff incorporating within them record keeping requirements. So for like persons in financial services, you have your know your customer regulations, right? And so within them, you have record keeping requirements. So if you're in one of those particular areas, you know that records related to customers have certain minimum requirements. So that means your records management skills would come into ensuring that they're organized, they're secured, they're protected to the point that if they are needed, you have them there for as long as they're required. And eventually, when they are no longer under that specific legal obligation, you have no more business need for them, then they can be sent for destruction once they have no, like I said, historical value for them. So actually what I want you to do, the initials relate to a particular, like I said, legislation or regulation in the US. So HIPAA, that relates to what we call medical information. And so that there's that privacy around individuals' medical information. Okay, you have something like what they call SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, and that would have come because anyone know of the Enron scandal? Okay, so they were found falsifying records. Okay, and they had a company that probably was their auditors, and then there was this whole thing about shredding the documents, although you knew you were under investigation. And so that particular regulation would have come out due to that whole episode involving Enron. Okay, GDPR, that relates to the European data privacy laws. And so what that says, and it came into effect recently, within the last 5 years, you are under obligations to ensure persons in the European Union's data is managed in accordance with that particular regulation. So right now I have this up on the screen because your assignment for next week will be to select one of these and give a brief report when you come back on what it is, what it's all about, and an example, if you can, on where this particular legislation was enforced, meaning a company was fined or penalties were levied against them for doing an action that breached one of these particular statutory obligations, regulations. So if you don't want to do something that's not related, you can look at something from our legislation in terms of, we do have a Data Protection Act. We do have, there's an act in relation to evidence. There's also, like I called earlier, there's the record keeping requirements to know your customer. So you can choose one of those particular legislation if you want to stick locally, or you can look at one of these and basically do a bit of research and come back and provide a little summary that tells us what the acronym stands for, what's the purpose behind that particular compliance mandate, and also if there was any incidents or what shall I say, any legal actions resulting in somebody being fined or jailed because they violated one of these particular compliance mandates. So is that clear? Everyone got that?
Clear to me.
Okay, so that it doesn't have to be one of these. Like I say, you can also provide a local legislation that has a specific mandate around record keeping, and you can share that. Okay, so let's look for our principles. Okay, so in terms of resources out there are lots of them, and I will also be providing you with some links. We have there's well, I don't think they're having any sessions anymore right now, but they do have a site. It's free records management material, and it's called the Records Management University. You can sign up, and whenever they have their sessions, they usually have like spring, summer, you're awarded a certificate as well. You can log on and listen to the particular discussion or record series they're having, and you get lots of good tips that you can incorporate in your day-to-day records management strategies. So that's also a link that I will be providing, in addition to 2 professional, well, actually 3. There's the Association of Intelligent Information Management. That's called AIM. They have tons of resources. And if you create an account, you can actually be in a community of information professionals, and you're able to, if you have an issue with something, you can share in the community, and you get good feedback and results from professionals who've actually been doing this job for years. Okay, so it's like a support group. And then there's also ARMA, the Association of Records Managers and Administrators. And those professionals are primarily focused on information governance. Okay, and so we have that there's a distinction between records management and information governance, in that information governance sits atop the records management sphere. So records management is like a subunit under that information management umbrella. And so your information governance focuses more on ensuring that their controls, the risks are mitigated, you have policies, procedures, etc. in place. Your records management focuses on identifying your records for business needs and making sure you have your policies and etc. in place to ensure that you're managing that particular record properly. Okay, so the records administrators, this particular one, they're usually things that happen during the month of April to focus on records and information management. So one year they focused on the 4 components tied to records management, one being information organization. And so it focused on some of the things that would have to be in place to get organized, your naming conventions, okay, in terms of how to manage the emails and get them organized. And so we're not drilling deep into these things, but we'll be highlighting the fact that in order to organize information, certain things have to be done, like classification, like naming conventions, like designated retention time frames for records, and the fact that records, rather than just individually trying to identify each document, you develop what is called a series. So this series focuses on records that are used for similar purposes. So like in HR, your onboarding, employee onboarding information, that would be like your application, your interview, etc. And so basically these series of records are used basically for the same length of time. So in series, you're looking at similar records retained for the same amount of time. And so it's easier to manage them that way, as opposed to having records with differing time frames all put together. So we have to organize our information. Okay, we also have to secure the information. Okay, and that's through password protection. That's making sure there's awareness around protecting information. So security around awareness information. Someone here is in that area. Someone here deals with security, information security. No? Okay. Okay, so after we secure it, we want to make sure that the information is available. We want to know where it is, how to access it. Okay, we want to always make sure we're using the most recent version, okay? Because then that's a risk if you're sending out information that's not current and inaccurate. So that there are some of the reasons why it's important to make sure we manage our information well, because at the end of the day, there are risks associated with poor records management. And so we'll also cover a few of those things. Okay, and so basically, after we've used it, we can delete it, but we don't just delete willy-nilly. We delete in accordance with retention rules in terms of the sensitivity of the information. Okay, and also we non-essentials, we try not to mix them with corporate records and make sure that we can get rid of those without the usual protocols. Once it's a record, however, you just simply cannot destroy it. And ultimately, the whole crux of the matter is, once we work for an organization, a company, an entity, the records we generate in the course of doing our work is not ours. It belongs to the company. And so we can't create records and store them where we want to store them or manage them how we want to manage them if there's a company policy around how we manage records. So the thing is, in most instances, there's no policy. Sometimes there's not even a person designated for that. And so one of the things I want to ask right now is the persons who are here, is there something within your organization designated to records management? Is there a unit? Is there a specific person that's been assigned the role of the records officer? No? Okay. Do you have a records management policy at your organization? How do you know what's records then for where you work? Still no answer? Okay, moving right along. Okay, so Young, you say you have an archive, okay? So you know, archive could be a verb or a noun. Archive as in a physical building that you store physical information records in. Okay. Archive could also be from an IT perspective. It's an action that you do with something. It's moving something from the active area to the inactive area. We have someone here that works with data in the data section.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
me.
McDonald. Okay, you
Yes,
said, where are you working? You're at where?
I'm at Deltec Bank.
Okay, so you're working, so all of your information then is primarily digital? You've already,
Yes.
okay, so you're not involved in any paper processes then?
No, everything is digital.
Oh, okay.
But we do have backup file. I mean, yes,
Okay.
do a backup paper, but that's everything is digital.
So from your clients engage with you via emails then?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So processes for you would be a bit different as opposed to some of your colleagues who, so McDonald is fully digital. Anyone else? Because that would impact what's conveyed with regard to records management. Because then if we have more persons here on paper, I still would have to talk about paper processes as well as how that translates into a digital environment. So everyone else here, you can type in the chat if you're a paper-based organization or if you're hybrid. Some people, they're using digital systems, but they're printing out and storing paper. So what's your scenario? Okay, so you're hybrid. So your processes you do electronically, Young, and then you keep the paper? Okay. So Young is hybrid, McDonald is digital. What about you, Demerit? Your paper, fully paper? Silvera, what's your scenario?
We're paper and digital. We're trying to move to be fully digital, but we in the process.
So those in hybrid, are you engaged in scanning, document capture as well?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Okay. All right, so that's good to know in terms of some of the approaches and options that would be mentioned. But like I say, records management of its own primarily is to assist in ensuring that the operations of the company can be conducted in a cost-effective and efficient way. You also want to make sure you're compliant with whatever regulations apply to you. And you also want to ensure, because we know now that privacy and security are big concerns, especially for persons who are operating in the digital era. You want to make sure your information is secure. You don't have to worry about hacking and your data being taken, ransom, etc. So that's why the records management component is so important, because that's the foundation, that's the bedrock. That's where you begin to identify what information you have, where it resides, who is responsible for it, how are you going to manage it, and eventually, how long do you need to keep it so that you can dispose of it properly. Okay, so I think I have up the first, let me just see if I have the first chapter. That would have, just to go over some of the book itself is not that big. However, there is a lot of information around certain procedures, like I say, creating a retention schedule. So primarily for those areas, I would be providing an overview. You don't really have to have all of the details, but what you want to focus on is, like I say, principles. You want to focus on understanding that records management covers the life cycle of a record. You want to be able to provide details about what is a record. Okay. So let me just see if I'll just share this now. Okay, so I'll make sure, because I have it in sections, we'll cover, but this is the name of the book. It's I think there's an additional version, but this is the one that we were using, the second edition. Okay, so you can probably look online as well. And it's a resource book, like I said. We're covering basics, but it's a good handbook to have. And so this is, I'll send this to make sure you get this first chapter, so that by next session, you would have read through it and you can come with questions and discussions. We'd also have 1 or 2 exercises taken from this particular chapter. So as I said earlier, this is a business discipline. Okay, and so information has value, but it only has value if we're able to access it. And in order to do that, we have to make sure we manage it properly. Okay, so the book is heavily US based. So you would see things related to federal and state, but it's just to give us that overview of how it ties in to regulating record keeping, as well as compliance with applicable legislations as it relates to record keeping. There's also standards involved. And so in reading, you can do a bit of research, like the ISO 15489. That's the core standard for record keeping. Okay, there's the foundational information on principles. Okay, this is very important, okay, because we have processes, and in processes, one department may have a part of the process. Another department may have the other part, and that ends it. So HR may be dealing with information when you come in on how much salary you would be paid, etc. But when it's time for payroll, that information is processed by your finance or account department. So they're the owners of the payroll information. And so those records ultimately would be their responsibility. And so you also see in certain instances where that record is in general use, because your department, if you're getting a promotion or something like that, they're forwarding information to HR in respect to payroll. So you could have that duplication where that same information is within the both departments. But ultimately, once your department has dealt with what they had to deal with and the matter's closed off, HR is responsible for ensuring that that record is properly captured and filed. Okay, so for your department who's involved in the process, okay, they're doing what they have to do for reference reasons. And when they're done, they're done. They don't have to they don't have to maintain another personnel file in that department if you have an HR department, if you see what I mean. So ownership of records, that's the important part of dealing with management of information and how they're treated. Okay, so records as an asset. Okay, asset meaning importance and value. You need them if something happens. COVID happened, people had to go home, couldn't get into the office. So if there was no continuity plan in place that said what vital records are needed to work with in a situation like this, there was challenges, there were issues, there were delays. So records wrap right up into the full scheme of things. Business continuity cannot go on without knowing the records you need. You need to have those records about your personnel. Okay, something happens, who's impacted? We're in a hurricane zone, so something like a Hurricane Dorian, etc. If you were on those islands, critical information for your company would be your employee listing. How do you get in contact with those employees? Also, you would need to know which teams do you bring on first. You need your team on to assess what happened at your office facility due to the storm. Is it safe for the workers to return to work? Do you have to set up another site? And all of this requires records and information. So that's why we look at it as an asset. So if it's not done properly, you can see the type of results that would happen in an organization. And so don't get stuck just on this pretty much outline and format. Think about it in terms of what we've seen play out in the country when we have elections and change of government, etc. There's all this to do and mudslinging about who said this and who said that and what wasn't found. Okay, but record keeping provides the evidence. Okay, and it must be done so that there's trust in that record. So if you don't have something formalized and documented, it won't have that integrity in place. Okay, transparency in terms of showing who did what, accountability in terms of who has responsibility for what. Okay, so information life cycle is also in there. So the records versus non-records, this goes into more details and the chart with the general questions that I gave you. Okay, so this would give you examples of records versus non-records. Okay, and then we get into components for the program. Okay, and remember I said we have to know the principles. These are outlined here. Generally accepted record keeping principles. Okay, so these are, it's 8 principles. The easiest way I can tell you to remember these principles is by the acronym TIP card. Okay, now on here, you may see accountability and then it goes to integrity, but transparency is also there. So transparency is at the bottom. But if you remember that acronym, then you would go accountability, you would go transparency, and then you would go to integrity, okay? And then you would go to protection. And then after that, you should have CARD, compliance, availability, retention, and disposition. So these summarize those very important principles around record keeping. Okay, the accountability factor. You must have a senior executive to support. Okay, without that, you'll feel like you're running around in circles. You won't be achieving anything if you don't have that senior management support. So you need that to get your frameworks up and running so that you can have the support to do what is needed. It says the executive will delegate program responsibility to appropriate individuals. So that means when you're thinking about a records management program, you need a records manager, you need some records officers, you may probably need some junior records assistants if you're going to be capturing, and you need some people at that level to help you with that. Okay, if you're in an organization that's small, maybe they may delegate one person. But if you're in an organization that has close to 300 people, you may have to have an appointment of a liaison in each particular department or unit or area. And that's just so that you are in contact with your core records unit, and when new advices, new programs, new initiatives are implemented that impact the other areas, you have a lead or someone in that area that you can train, and they can go in and ensure, because you can't be all those places at one time. So that's why it's critical to have that core foundation with your senior executive support and your teams and liaisons within the department that help to carry out whatever that program mandate is. Okay, so you can read through these. Accountability, like I said, if you remember that acronym, TIP, CARD, accountability, transparency, integrity, protection, compliance, availability, and it pretty much gives you the phrase around it. So for compliance, what is that? Organizations' records management program must comply with applicable laws and other binding authorities, as well as the organization's own policies. So compliance does not only refer to your, shall I say, your local and international laws and regulations. It also relates to the policies you put in place. So that records management policy outlines what is to be done, the purpose, etc. And so as the person with that responsibility, you would basically have to ensure compliance is being done internally within the organization with respect to its own policies. So if you have a policy in terms of records management that says prior to you leaving the service of that organization, You ensure that all your files are returned if it's in the physical to the record center, the registry, whatever you call it. Some different terms apply in different organizations, or whatever files that you would have been keeping in your course of working are turned over to the supervisor. So that would mean if you have electronic folders, those are made accessible to the supervisor before you leave, then those things should be complied with. And in some jurisdictions, that's like a part of the check off or the exit view. So if there's outstanding information with relation to corporate records, something you were working for, you're basically held accountable to ensure it's accessible, or it's been returned for persons in physical areas that have to work back and forth with physical files. Okay, so it goes into records retention, providing, like I say, more of a US-based overview on it. It explains the policies with regard to records retention and laws and regulatory compliance. Okay, and then we get into management of inactive records that we no longer use on a day-to-day basis. We're going through retrieval of active records, protection of the vital records. So these type terms we will also be looking at. And the important thing, why? Why do all of this? So it outlines and gives a lot of detail around the business case. Reducing operating costs. Okay, it goes into the labor things. It talks about minimizing risk, and that's one of the big factors involved in managing information. Your risk could be from exposing people's personal data. You could keep people's personal data too long because under the data protection laws, you're only supposed to be keeping the data as long as you need it. Once you're done with it, you've completed that purpose, then that data should no longer be in your custody. So these are some of the important things out there, even in terms of if there's legal issues, this thing about spoliation, you're having a dispute, a legal matter before the court, every record that relates to that matter has to be put on hold. You cannot process, you cannot destroy, because that's where the spoliation would come in. If you know you have impending legal matters and you start to destroy the information, and the court does not look favorable on that. So you have to have process, especially if you're a big company. This is a very costly process to have to go through, because you're literally having to make sure every record you have in relation to that case, you find and produce. Okay, so functions, duties. Okay, and at the end of the chapter, there's usually a summary. Okay, so the major points, okay, is right here. So at the end of the sessions, and like I say, because we're meeting online, I will make sure you get the various chapters, because we will read through those and we will come back and pretty much focus on the general nuggets within the various chapters. Any questions so far? Because we're not gonna stay until 9 this evening. We're gonna probably break at about 7, about 8. and I will send the information. So just to confirm, I think Miguel may have sent me a list. I can't remember if the emails was on it, but you can still put your email in the chat so that I can get it and send you the information with relation to the principles and also the other handouts relating to the first chapter on what is a record and reasons for that, as well as links to a few interesting events for major companies that were in breach of record keeping requirements and got quite hefty fines. So let me just pull that up here. Okay. So I have a copy here of when we talk about, oh, let me just pull that back up. My standards, okay. So this is what I was talking about in relation to one of the things that governs records management, best practices and international standards. So those principles, they're related to the generally accepted record keeping principles promulgated by the Association of Records Managers and Administrators. And it provides a governance, maturity, model rating as well. So you can look at the various levels. There's a maturity going from 1 to 5, and you're able to assess where your organization is. So we will also be able to do that and discuss that within the session. Once you've gone over the principles and you understand what they're linked to, then you can do a brief assessment of your own environment and say what rating you think your institution deserves. Okay, but this is a very important document for records keeping. Okay. Okay, so these are things that it covers. Okay, principles, it covers record system, the policies, appraisals and controls. Okay. And processes for creating, capturing, and managing records. Okay, so if you're responsible for your company's records management initiatives, or if you're attached to a unit that isn't a part of the process, like if you're in audit or if you're in, like I said, information security, or you may be in IT, there's a link. There's a need to collaborate in order to ensure holistically the records management program is being run as it should be. Records management, they say, makes the rules, but IT has tools. So IT can suggest lots of tools, but those tools are only effective with the proper rules. Okay, so you need rules around how you create it. You need rules around who has access to that record. You need rules around where is that record to be stored. You need rules around how long are we going to keep that record. So far I've told you about the generally accepted record keeping principles and the one that we're looking at now, ISO 15489. Okay, and so you can also just do a little research for, like I say, those local legislations that have an impact on record keeping. And we talked about data protection. We talked about the Evidence Act. There's the Computer Use and Misuse Act. There's also the coming on stream soon. Anyone been listening to all the talks about freedom of information? Anyone? Freedom of information has been passed. So primarily for government and agencies and corporations, that means that information classified as public knowledge, public information, will have to be made accessible to persons who inquire or make a request for that information, and it has to be done in a specific time frame. And I think that the time frame is like 30 days. So it's been passed, but they're building out the frameworks. So if you're in a government agency, or you're also involved in like that's like quasi corp, okay? I'm not sure how much of a reach it'll have with private. However, the right for the public to know comes into play. And so it's even more important that we're able to identify what information we create, where it is, okay, and be able to search and find it if it's needed, because that comes with fines and penalties as well. So freedom of information, that's one of those local things that we are facing to come on stream soon, that also impact good records management. Okay, let me see. I saw something. Okay, so I have email for Demerit. I have email for Young. Okay, that's anyone else? Can you put your email address in there so I can try and send that information to you this evening, please? Okay. Just make sure. Okay, so records management, like I said, in and of itself is very important for ensuring your business mandates can be carried out effectively. Okay, you build your records management strategy around your core vision and goals and mission of that company. Okay, I guess that the thing is, it's not a lot of people say records management just ain't sexy, so they ain't into that. But if you don't have it, you're gonna run into problems. And so right now, I just wanted to share this before we pretty much wrap up. And it was something I mentioned earlier in terms of records, and the fact that when we look at how long we need to keep them, we kind of organize them in what we call a series. And this is what it means when we speak of a record series, okay? So you see that main circle, employment applications. And so that application has attached to it several documents. Okay, so when we look at how long we need to keep that, those are the things that are attached. So we can say for employment applications, once that person has been selected and hired, that record would be there as long as they are there. And even when they leave, if they left in the what we would call the golden years, meaning that they were with that company long enough to retire, while much of the record information on that file may no longer be needed, there are some key things that the company still has to hold on to for a number of years as it relates to their retirement, entitlement, and benefits. So you see, um, that's how it evolves into managing these things with what we call a schedule, okay, and utilizing technology so that you can apply these time frames, not when it's time for the record to go, but from you actually create it, so given the fact that there's the move to go digital, you're not tangibly being able to pull physical files and mark them as retired and put them in a space over there for 40 years or whatever time frame your company designates is necessary for that information to be kept. You can apply that through your application solution for records management so that you get alerts and flags, because a lot of time frames when we think of retaining information is more event based. So it's not just this thing sits here for 6 years and you take it out. An event happens, so something like a retirement. And so based on that, you would then have a time frame of how long you need to keep that. Somebody gets fired, that's an event. Okay, so that means XYZ in terms of what has to be kept, because if it's something that involves a legal matter, that particular employee file won't just fall away just like that. That can't be done away with until that litigation matter is resolved. So basically, in terms of organizing records at the series level, that's where we get the most control, because then you can base those on the different functions, and out of those, like this is related to employment, and so these would be some of those things that are attached. And so at that level, it's called a record series. But that record series is made up of documents that you can see: application form, a resume, a cover letter, transcripts, letters of reference. And so the whole thing, it states it right there, and they're all kept the same length of time. And one of the drawbacks when companies have to do what we call disposition, meaning then the process of clearing, and especially if you're transitioning from paper to electronic, you don't want to take all that paper, some of which you don't need, and capture that into an electronic system. That's a very costly approach. So what you find when people are engaged in capture, what they're trying to do is look at the documents that they still have a need for and capture those. So the rest of the documents that there's no business need for, they are then properly disposed of, whether it be through writing up their destruction certificates to say these records are expired, we don't need these. The manager signs off on it, and then you do your destruction. Whether you hire a vendor like the VRC, formerly Sunrise, or it's an in-house shredding where you have a facilities team, you put your documents into a secure shred bin, they come for the bin, take them down to the shred area and dispose of them. But it's all involving a process with controls, and that's what yields the results of effective records management. So it's not done in a vacuum. You have to consult, you have to reach out to people, you have to be kind of nosy to know what's going on. Because if you have a policy and the policy stipulates that requests are to be made for destruction through the records unit, and you have people in departments just shredding as they will, that's a breach, that's a violation of the policy. And so that's
That's the reason you have to have in place liaisons in the different office to make people aware and inform them of the process for managing the corporate records. They're not our records, they belong to the company. So with that said, is everything clear with regard to what we'll be doing next week, the assignment? And I have your email addresses to send that particular chapter for review. I see somebody else. Okay, so Melanie and McDonald. Okay, so I have everyone's email. Good. Okay. So this evening, like I said, it's a short evening. Just wanted to introduce each other and pretty much give a high level overview of what we'll be covering for the remainder of the time. We have an assignment, and that assignment is in relation to what some, or you can, like I say, you don't have to, doesn't have to be some. If you want to be, if you feel you could do more than one, that's fine. But I want each person to research it could be local, or like I said, it could be an international, based on the ones that I showed you. GDPR, that's the European Union data protection rules. Somebody can do, or do you want me to assign? So we don't all end up with something. Or everyone have an idea what they think that they may want to check, or you're just gonna do your research. I just don't want everyone coming back with GDPR or HIPAA or SOX. Maybe before we leave, we want to do that. Anyone interested in looking for a local legislation that has to be complied with relating to records management? McDonald, do you want to do something local, or do you want to do one of the international ones?
I'll try a local one.
Okay, so what about looking at data protection?
Yes, I'll do that. That's the new one.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, I'll do
So you
that.
could tell, I don't know if they had any updates since it came out.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's a data protection app. You have a
Uh-huh.
data protection commissioner. Anyone else want to try freedom of information? It's not out, but you can speak to what's been put in the news. It's been passed. Anyone want to look into that and say what implications it has for records management? So McDonald is going to do data protection, the data protection app. Okay, Demerit, you have any preference? What's your industry now? You could put it in the chat. Jada?
I have mine in the chat. I'll do the signs, the socks.
Okay, that's Sarbanes-Oxley, and that relates to yeah, that's something related to financial. So you could research SOX, right? That would be good. So we'll get a different perspective. One is local. Anyone else? Oh, let me check the chat. Make sure. Oh, Demerit said she'd do freedom of information. Thank you. Okay, that's great. Okay, let me see who else we have here. So McDonald, data protections, Jada, SOX, demerit, freedom of information. Mr. Young, you have a particular choice? Oh, you're gonna do international? So, Young, do you want to do HIPAA? That's the one that focuses on medical and health records. That's a US legislation. Let me see. Okay, so what we have here now, McDonald, data protection, Jada is gonna check on SOX, demerit, freedom of information, and Young is gonna do HIPAA. Okay, yes, so we'll all do our research and come prepared to share next week in terms of legislation and regulations that impact the records management field in terms of compliance. So with that said, thank you all very much. And I look forward to an interactive session when we come back. I'll also email my recent headlines in the news that would also relate to some of these same legislations that we are talking about, so that we can put it in perspective in terms of the actual need for records management within our context of the society, the culture, and basically the importance it's had over the years. Although it's not seen as one of the forerunners or out there, it's been working in the background to ensure that we are able to get the information we need, and that it's accurate, it's timely, because without those things, we wouldn't really be able to operate our business successfully or our organization and meet those overarching objectives and goals or mandates that we have. So good night all. Take care. Thanks for coming.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.